Alright, welcome back everyone to another tutorial video. Today we're going to do some basic blueprints, but I also wanted to showcase one of the most important things when it comes to modding in Pavlov, and that is the Pavlov Wiki. So this is going to have quite a bit of information that you will need in order to do things like skins, certain guns, etc. So get familiar with this, and I'll quickly show you some of the things that I like to look at. One of the most important things I would say is the item IDs, as this is going to tell you the weapon and the ID associated with it, so you can spawn people with those specific weapons. It's also going to give you all the items as well, such as attachments, medical stuff, grenades, etc. Also important is the skins section. This is going to tell you all the different skins that you can use that are built in, as well as vehicles, TTT rules, etc. So get familiar with this, as it's incredibly helpful, and we're going to go ahead and create a couple of blueprints that I think some people would find useful. So we're going to go back to our map, and I didn't talk about this much, but we're actually going to look at the tutorial proxy really quick, or a player proxy really fast. So this is attached to every single player. Every player has this actor, this element attached to them. And one of the most basic things that a lot of people like to do with a player proxy is change skins. And so let's go ahead and create something where when we spawn in, we want to have a random skin. So what we're going to do is, and if say, let's just start with a blank thing so that way we can get on the same page. So we're going to go to override, and we're going to find begin play, which is this. And what we're going to do is we're actually going to grab something called switch has authority. You're going to add a delay, because that's always important. You're going to need to right click somewhere. You're going to do get pawn, and you want to specifically be under the player proxy Pavlov API list. This is important. Alright, so we're going to get the pawn, which is the player model, the actual player themselves. And we're going to drag off of this, and we're going to look up get player proxy. Okay. Now we're going to drag off of this, and we're going to type in set skin. We're going to connect the execution pin. And here is where that big list of skins is going to be really helpful. These are case sensitive, so make sure that you type them in case sensitive wise, so you'll notice a lot of these are lowercase. That is on purpose. Make sure that you are keeping that in mind. So every time a player spawns, basically, or when they begin play, we're going to spawn them as farmers. And the target for this is the player proxy, and we want to specifically target that player's specific proxy. So that's what we're doing. That's a basic example of setting a player's skin. Now, what I really like to do is I like to have it where you spawn with a random set of skins, but we're going to go ahead and we're going to drag this off. We're going to type random, and we're going to do a random array item. So now we have this, but we don't have an array. So we need to do just that. We need to create or make an array. We're going to add a couple pins, and we're going to add the names of these skins that we have. So I'm going to add not farmers. We're going to add farmer. We'll add clown, because that's always a fun one too. Let's add cop. And let's add prisoner. Cool. So now, every time a player spawns, they're going to spawn with one of these four random skins: a farmer, a clown, a cop, or a prisoner. And there we go. So now we have an example of players spawning in with random skins every time. Let's say that you want to specifically spawn in with a special skin, and you want other players to spawn in with just some other kind of skin. So what we're going to do is we're actually going to we're going to break this. We want to check, basically we want to have it where we want it to check our player and see if we have a specific name. What we're going to do is we're actually going to drag from the get pawn. We're going to drag it somewhere right here, and we're going to do player status. And this Pavlov API get Pavlov player status by pawn will pop up. We're going to go ahead and select that. We're going to connect the execution pin. We'll drag this away. And now we have this stuff. So we see this other dark blue element. We're going to go ahead and click that and drag it somewhere. And when we let go, we're going to automatically have this option to break a Pavlov player status. So we're going to do that. And we have a bunch of stuff. This is unique to each player status. So there's a lot you can do with this. You can make it where you can check for teams for certain skins. You can make it where you check for certain players. In this example, we're going to do based on player names. We're going to drag a player state out. And we're going to type get name. And under player state, we're going to get a player name. We're going to go ahead and select that. So now how do we check for stuff? How do we do an if statement if you're programmatically inclined? Well, in Unreal Engine, we're going to use something called a branch. And a branch is going to use a condition statement, a true-false, to tell you which way to go. So from here, we want to check a specific name. So we're going to drag this out. Now, pink corresponds to string. And you can hover over these and they'll tell you what they reference, like cache is an integer, team ID is an integer, health an integer. All this stuff are booleans or true falses. These are floats. We aren't using Steam ID since we're actually on Pavlov Shack, and I wouldn't recommend using this unless you're making stuff for the Steam version specifically and not for like Oculus or any of that other stuff. I like to just use the get player name just because it's a little easier. Now from here, what we're going to do is we're going to drag this out and we're going to type in equal. And now we, under the string library here or drop down, we have some options. We can see if the name does not equal, equals, or case sensitivity. Now, if you want to do exactly, if you want to check for names, you do want to make sure that you're typing in the name exactly how it shows on the game. Otherwise, you're going to have some problems. I like to use case insensitive equals for the sake of just simplicity, but do whatever you'd like. I'm going to use case insensitivity, but you're going to go down here. You're going to have this little option here, and you're going to type in the name of the player that you're looking for. In this case, I'm going to use myself as an example. So I wanted to basically check to see if at the start of the game, if this specific player pawn, this player, has this name. And if it is true, we're going to go ahead and connect the booleans up together. If this is true, then we want to set the skin of that player to whatever unique one we want. So let's say I wanted to be a farmer. But if it's false, we want to set player's skin. Let's say cop. Now the important thing is remembering this target. If you don't add this, players' skins are not going to change. So you're going to drag this to that player proxy just like the other one. Make sure those are connected, otherwise you're going to have problems. So now, every time a player spawns in, if they don't have this name, they're not going to be spawning in as a farmer, they're going to spawn in as a cop. And vice versa. If I spawn in, it's going to check and see that that statement is true, that my player state has the name MaJerati. If that's true, it's going to spawn me as a farmer. And that's how you make a unique spawn for a certain player. So let's take it a step further. Let's add a list of players. Okay. So let's say that we want to have a list of players. Now we could add a bunch of these and do that, but let's do it one better. Let's create an array. So what we're going to do is we're going to, actually we're going to work backwards a little bit. So we're going to drag this boolean off and we're going to type in the word contains. Now this is going to be, and we want to specifically do array, otherwise it's going to be a problem. Alright, make sure you're under array, contains item. So now we have this instead of the other one that we had before. So now we want to create an array again. So make array. And now we're going to connect this bottom piece to this name here. And we're going to need to refresh these so that way it shows up as a string array. So now we want to check to see if that player from that pawn is inside this list. So we're going to add up some pins. We're going to add name 1. You can add, I mean, obviously you would make these the names of the players that you want to check for. We're just doing it this way. Okay. And there we go. So now what we have here is, instead of just one player, we want to have as many players as we want in this list. You know, depending on their names, we want them to also have the farmer skin. And that's how you create something that allows you to create a list of players to spawn in with a special skin. Obviously, make sure you compile stuff and save it, otherwise you're going to have a problem. So we looked at the player proxy, and we know that that allows us to change skins and do all kinds of stuff. And there's actually even more that we can do with it, but we'll get to that in a later video. Let's go back to the game logic, because one thing that we really like to do is we want people to spawn with weapons and different types of weapons. So we're going to go to override. We're going to on player spawned. We're going to add a little delay again. Now, when a player spawns, we're going to go ahead and break this as well. So, you know, click, drag, find a spot, and break it. So now we want it where every time a player spawns, we want them to be able to use the buy menu. So what we're going to do is from completed, or after the delay, we're going to type in buy. So set player buying enabled. Cool. And we want to target the player state. So we're going to match player state to player state. And now, every time a player spawns, they're going to be able to buy stuff. So we want to change this duration, this number, this time to whatever we want. I'm going to do 500 seconds. And the max distance that you can buy stuff, I'm going to put 500 as well. And there we go. So now every time a player spawns, they're going to be able to buy something. Now sometimes we don't want players to be able to buy at all. What we would do is instead we would set the duration to 0 and the buy zone to 0, and we would spawn people with specific weapons. Say you had a game mode where you wanted one team to have this weapon, or one team to have this weapon, or these things. This would be a great way to start. So let's go ahead and do just that. So we're going to do a team 0 versus team 1 kind of thing. So now it's important that if you are doing teams that you make sure that this is untagged, otherwise it's going to be free for all. As long as this is blank and shows false, then we have team 1 and team 0. So what we're going to do is we're going to disable buying by basically setting the duration to 0. And now we're going to go and do that branch statement again. We're going to do an if statement. Now we want to see if you're on team 1 or if you're on team 0. So we're going to take this, equal, and if they're on team 0, we're going to put that there. So if they're on team 0, they're going to be true, and if they're on team 1, they'd be false, because there's no other options for it, so it's either 1 or 0. Or if you wanted to, you could, and probably a safer option is to actually use something called a switch statement like we did earlier, except we're going to do a switch int or switch on int or integer. And you would take this and you would tie it to team ID. So now you would add a pin, and you'd add 2 pins. You have team 0 and team 1. So if they're on team 0, we want to drag this, spawn item, and now we have this. We have this parameters blue. So whenever we see these blues so far, we're just going to drag it and we're going to make or break. In this case, we're going to make it. Cool. Now, first thing I like to do is I like to make sure that the player is tagged correctly. So I want to take this and drag it to the player state. So that way that player gets spawned with the item. And now we have all this other stuff. So what we can do is we can go back to that big list of stuff and we can find something to spawn players with. So in this case, I'm going to spawn team 0 with, I'm going to spawn them with a Tokarev. So I'm going to take this, I'm going to paste it. Alright, there we go. And I want it to spawn in their hands when they start. So I'm going to tag this. If you want it to spawn in their inventory, you would tag this option here, and then the option right below will tell you where it'll spawn. If the number is 0, it's on the left side, 1, it's on the right side, and if it's 2, it's on their back. But I'm going to spawn it in their hand. And there we go. And you can spawn it with a magazine or without one by tagging this option here. And same with default attachments like scopes, silencers, etc. There we go. So now we got to spawn team 1 with stuff. So we're going to drag this out, spawn item, and we're going to do the exact same thing basically. I want team 1 to spawn with an M9. And again, always make sure that the player is dragged to that player state, otherwise things aren't going to work. And people are going to spawn in with nothing and they'll be very unhappy. So there we go. And we'll spawn that with a magazine. Alrighty, so there we go. Now we have it where every time a player is spawned, it's going to disable their buying, it's going to check to see if they're on team 0 or team 1, and it's going to spawn them with an item that we chose. Now it's important that if this for some reason fails that you have a backup, and that's what this default is. You can disable this, but I would recommend in the event that something does happen that you create a default scenario. And that's exactly what I'm going to do. So if for some reason that check fails, which can happen sometimes, we want to, as a backup, spawn players, let's say with a 1911. And we'll go ahead and drag this, whoops, to player state. So there we go. Now we have it where if you're on team 0, you spawn with a Tokarev. And if you're on team 1, you spawn with an M9. And if for some reason you don't have a team ID, which can happen very rarely, then we want to make sure that you still spawn it with something, and in this case it's the 1911. My god, there is just so much to do with this kind of stuff. And really, honestly, it comes down to whatever you would like to do. So we're going to go ahead and end off this video, and then I will talk about creating certain things like boxes where if players walk into them they get a specific skin or they'll get a specific item.